is everybody doing today? It took me a second there. So how many of you guys have heard of the band AC/DC? I hope you have, because that's what my sermon's about today. AC/DC, in case you don't know, is a really popular rock and roll band, grew in the 1970s, and I think they are still together, maybe, I don't really know. I don't follow up with them anymore. But one of the most famous rock and roll bands, one of the more popular rock and roll bands, and one of their more popular songs came out, and this song is called Thunderstruck, in case you didn't know. Now, a little bit about AC/DC. They want themselves to be associated with everything raw power, high energy, and things like that. And so that's why they came up with the name for their band, AC/DC, because it's talking about an electric current going into an appliance. And then whenever they were trying to write this song, Thunderstruck, it started out with a rhythm on the guitar, and then they added in a couple of the other instruments here and there. And as it evolved, they wanted to find a name that represented this raw power, this high energy that they wanted to emit in everything that they do. And as they were writing the song, they came up with the name Thunderstruck, because it really gives you this idea of being in awe in front of something that's so high energy, so high power, and just a really raw experience of something that's so powerful. That's what AC/DC wanted to get across, and it's something that being thunderstruck is something that we see happen in the Bible, in case you didn't know. So we're going to look at a bunch of these instances, but namely, we're going to look at Zechariah chapter 9, and the last few verses there, where people are thunderstruck, where they experience God, and as a result of being in the presence of this awesome, mighty power, this raw energy, they are thunderstruck. They are left in awe, gaping at this. And here's what happens in Zechariah chapter 9. And I'm going to teach you guys a new word real quick. You guys ready for this? It's called a theophany. You guys ever heard of this word? Theophany. Theophany. It comes from the word for God and appearance from the Greek. So it literally just means God appearing. A theophany is whenever God makes his presence known to his people, makes his presence before his people, and whenever he does that, people are thunderstruck. So here's Zechariah. Here's the instance of a theophany, and whenever the people are thunderstruck. Zechariah 9:14. Then the Lord will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. The Lord God will sound the trumpet and will march forth in the whirlwinds of the south. This is a theophany. This is a appearance of God, the presence of God, and it's a event where people become thunderstruck. Now, whenever God makes a theophany in the Bible, it's almost always accompanied by two things: bright light, loud noise. We get that right here because he says, in here we see his arrow is like lightning, and then he blows a trumpet, which is like thunder. Now, here's a couple of the other instances. Back in Exodus, whenever God is appearing to Moses, and whenever God's bringing his Israelites out of Egypt, he comes before them, makes a theophany, and with it comes bright light and loud noises. Here's Exodus 3, verse 2. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of a fire, this bright flame out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And then later on in Exodus 13:21, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light. And then Exodus 19:16, on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, or bright light, loud noise. And then in Revelation, whenever John looks into heaven, gets a little glimpse of what's going on behind the veil, here's what happens. Revelation 4:5. From the throne of God, where God's presence is, came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire. And then later on in Revelation, now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. They blow the trumpets. Whenever God makes an appearance, it's accompanied by bright light and loud noise. And whenever that happens, that causes people to become thunderstruck, to be in awe and not sure what to do whenever they experience God, because he's literally in their presence. So in Zechariah chapter 9, we see this theophany. God makes an appearance, shows up before his people, and the people become thunderstruck. And here's how the rest of the verses are going to work out. For verses 15, 16, and 17 in Zechariah 9, this is the end of that chapter. How it works is God makes his appearance in verse 14, and then we're going to see what God does, and then we're going to see what the people do, and they are thunderstruck, and what they do as a thunderstruck people. And then we're going to see what God does a second time, and then a second thing that the people do when they are thunderstruck. So are you guys ready for this? What God does, what the people respond with, what God does, and then what the people respond with again. Here's how it goes. The first one is that God protects his people. God protects his people. Now, have we talked about this already? Does this seem familiar in Zechariah that God protects his people? Have you guys heard this before? Somebody nod your head yes. It's because we have talked about it. This is what Zechariah is about. These people, if you forgot again, they have been enslaved and in captivity and under attack. But now we see God protects them. He says, what you have experienced is not going to be that way anymore. I'm going to change it on what's going on. And God repeats this over and over again to Judah. Now, in Scripture, whenever something is repeated, you got to pay attention. Whenever you hear the same themes, the same ideas over and over again, the same word repeated, you got to pay attention because it's either, well, it's obviously going to be very important and probably you need to hear it. These people who have been under attack, enslaved, and been beaten down and have no hope, they need to hear that God protects them. And for us today, we might feel like we're under attack and just going through a tough time, but you need to hear God protects you. And here's the verse that goes along with this. Here's where Zechariah outlines this. Zechariah 9, verse 15, just the first part of this. And the Lord of hosts will protect them. And that's it. That's as simple as it gets. He doesn't elaborate it too much on that. We're going to look on a little bit about what he does, but he doesn't say it in any simpler way than right there. The Lord protects us. He says it as a simple fact, the same way that you would say the sky is blue, the sun is bright. That's just the simple way he says it. God protects us. It's a simple fact that everybody knows, and he doesn't get any more simple than that. I love it. Short, sweet, to the point. God protects. That's all he says about that. But he also uses this word for him, the Lord of hosts. Now, the Lord of hosts, when you see the Lord in all capitals like that, it is almost always Yahweh's name, the divine name, sometimes translated as Jehovah, written in the Hebrew. And this name is a big deal for people. We don't really understand this. To give you an example, back whenever there's monasteries and people literally hand recording and hand copying scriptures like this, whenever they got to this word and would have to write the word the Lord with all capitals, Yahweh's name, divine name, afterwards they would break their quill and burn it so that they wouldn't defame or defile the name of God. That they took incredible reverence for this word. And whenever he uses it, it's drawing on that reverence. And he says, this is Yahweh, the creator of hosts. Now, host is a weird word for of armies, of all of the armies. And it depicts God as the commander-in-chief of every single army on the earth. He says God is controlling these. He's got the final say. He tells them where to go. And he tells this to people who have been attacked and under siege and enslaved. And he says, Yahweh, the commander of all the armies of the world, will protect you. There will not be anybody to attack you. There will not be any more attacks on you. God protects you. And he gives a nice visible image after this. He says, Yahweh, the creator of hosts, the commander of armies, protects you. And then he gives them this. And they shall devour and tread down the sling stones. Now, sling stones brings us back to David and Goliath, right? We know the story of David and Goliath. David takes up a sling and a stone. He takes one stone, swings it around, thumps Goliath in the forehead and kills him. That's the David and Goliath story. And it's a pretty vicious way to die, getting thumped in the head with a stone. And it shows that this is not just some little kid's toy. This is a real weapon of war that can be used to harm people. And God says whenever these guys sling their stones at you, God's going to tread them down and devour them. He's not going to literally eat them. He's going to completely reject them and toss them aside and say, those aren't even going to get close to attacking you. They're not going to even get close to touching you. Now, basketball fans over here, Jordan, you like basketball? Have you ever heard the name Dikembe Mutombo? Didn't think so. Basketball player from the 90s and the early 2000s. This guy is 7'2" from, I believe, the Congo. And he comes over, goes to college in America, had never played basketball before, and then at college, he gets recruited to play basketball because he's 7'2". He's a huge dude. So he starts playing basketball, and as he's playing, he becomes pretty famous for his ability to block shots because he's 7'2" and he can jump. So he swats these shots out of the way, and eventually he gets drafted into the NBA and plays for a really long time, a decade or more. And he becomes even more famous because every time he would swat away somebody's basketball, he would say, Not in my house. Have you guys heard this before? Does that sound familiar? That's the Kembe Mutombo. That's what he does. He swats away the attack and he says, not in my house, not going to happen. That's what God does. These sling stones, these attacks, they come at his people and he swats them away and says, not in my house, not to my people. He protects his people and he will not allow them to be attacked. So as a result of God's protection, the people are thunderstruck. They are in awe of God. And here's how they respond. The people celebrate. The people celebrate. They don't sit around and say, thanks, God. No, they get up and they throw a party and they bring everybody around. They eat food, they drink wine, and they have a good time. They celebrate. They have a festival, and it's not just a day-long event. This is weeks and weeks and weeks. By the way, the Jewish people, they know how to party. Whenever people here get married, we have like 2 or 3 hours of a wedding ceremony afterwards, or the wedding feast. No, they had it for like a week. They know how to party. They know what's going on. So whenever they throw a festival, it's not just a couple-hour event. This is a week-long event. This takes a lot of time, and they throw a party, and they know how it's done. Check out the last part of verse 15. And they shall drink and roar as if drunk with wine, and be full like a bowl, drenched like the corners of the altar. Now, drinking and roaring, talking about the NBA. After an NBA final, what do? They bring out the champagne and they give them a champagne shower. After the NASCAR races, what do to the winner? They shower them with champagne. How about after the Stanley Cup, what do? They pour the champagne in the Stanley Cup and then they drink it out of there. And with baseball, with the World Series, what do? They give them a champagne shower because it's a universal sign of a party. They get together, they throw a party, and they have a good time. That's what they're doing. And it's not saying, go ahead and get drunk. It's saying, go have a good time. Enjoy yourself. Throw a party. Bring everybody around. Throw a feast and celebrate. This is a good day. This isn't a day to sit back and relax. This is a good day. And he says, they're so full with wine and with food. It's so excessive that it's so much. It's so good that it's like full like the bowl and drenched like the corners of the altar. Now, we're not Jewish people, so this is pretty far removed from us. This is, we don't really understand this, but if you go back and read some Leviticus and things like that, it tells them how to sacrifice animals to atone for the sins. And what they would do is they cut the animal open on the altar, and then they would fill the bowl up on the side with the blood from this animal, whether it be a bull or a goat or a ram or whatever it was. And they would take a little bit of that and they would sprinkle it onto the side of the altar. Now, did you guys know that animals have a lot of blood in them? Now, my brother, whenever he was younger, this didn't happen to me, thankfully, but my dad decided to take him to the butchering of a hog. And they tie it up by the feet, hang it up, slit its throat, and then watch the blood flow out for about 20 minutes. There's a lot of blood in an animal. If you guys don't know, go down to Farmers Packing. Do they slaughter animals there? If not, you can find somebody who can and watch as they slaughter an animal and how much blood comes out. And that's just a visible image of, look at how much blood is in an animal whenever they sacrifice it. That's how much wine and how much food and how much of a good time. It's overflowing with this party, this festival. That's how the party should be. Whenever we celebrate God's protection, it's supposed to be an all-out festival, an all-out party that we don't hold anything back. Judah's celebration is more excessive than the blood of a slaughtered animal, and they have wine and food and plenty for everyone. Now again, we have wedding receptions, but the best part of a wedding reception is not watching them get married. No offense. It's not watching you guys get married. It's the free food afterwards, right? One of my good friends from college, he got married right at the tail end of our senior year, I think the week after we graduated. And you know what he had for food? Chick-fil-A. I was there and I was eating free Chick-fil-A because I was happy about that. But again, it only lasted a day. This party, this festival, this rejoicing and celebrating that God has protected us, that's supposed to last weeks and weeks and go on and on and on. And it's not supposed to be just a small party, it's a small get-together. No, this is everybody get together, rejoice, sing, shout, and celebrate because God protects us. Thunderstruck people, they celebrate whenever God protects them. So after we see this, we're going back to this formula. We see God has protected us, and so we celebrate. And now another thing that God does is that God saves. Again, does this sound familiar? Good. It should sound familiar because this is all throughout Zechariah, all throughout the Bible, where God saves his people. Because people cannot save themselves, and God says, I will save you, I will take care of you. And this is important. It's repeated over and over again, so we need to pay attention. Here's where he says God saves. And he does it in the same way where he talked about protecting. Verse 16, and on that day, the Lord their God will save them. Again, doesn't get any simpler than that. A matter of fact, there's no doubt about it. Everybody knows it. God saves his people. Yes, the sky is blue, the grass is green, and God saves the people. It's just a simple matter of fact. It's what everybody knows. It's what the people know, but he reminds them again and again, God saves them. And I really love the short, sweet, to the point. Everybody knows that God saves them. And he says, on that day. And that's a shorthand of the day of the Lord. Have you guys heard this term before? On that day, the day of the Lord. That is the eschatological, which is a fancy word for the end of days. It was after this life ends, after this world is gone, and God comes back and Jesus comes back. That's the day of the Lord. That's the eschatological days. That's the very end of it all. And he says at the very end, God's going to come back, judge his enemies, save his people, and it's going to be a good time. That's what he says. God's people are saved. That's what's going to happen. Now, this day for the Hebrew people, they looked forward to it. They said, that's coming real soon. I'm part of the right family. I'm going to be on that team. And for the Christians in the first couple centuries here, they say that day's coming. That's really soon. I'm ready for that. I'm on the right team. But a couple hundred and a couple thousand years later for us, we have this far-off removed idea of the day of the Lord, this eschatological day that Jesus returns. We have this idea, maybe in another 1,000 years, maybe sometime down the line. No, you should have the idea that it could be today, this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow, every single day. You should know that God can come back and God will come back one of these days. It's something that you need to believe that you might not die in this life. You might get to see Jesus. And you better hope you get to see Jesus because it's going to be better than dying, I think. God says you need to have this idea, just as these people have, that God saves him and he's coming back really, really soon. Now, in those thousands of years, nothing has changed. The day is imminent and God saves us. We need to have the same idea. And God gives another analogy, another illustration on his saving for his people. He says, as the flock of his people, he says, we are sheep, he is our shepherd. You guys know anything about sheep? They're dumb. That's all you got to know. Sheep are dumb. That's what you need to know because if you leave them alone, they're going to get lost and they're going to get attacked by wolves and it's going to be bad for them. But if you have a shepherd there with a stick who can smack away the wolf and keep you in the pen and protect you and save you, it's going to be good. We are sheep and he is our shepherd. God will save us. He will protect us and he's going to be with us forever. And here's the next part. Verse 16 again, the next part of this. For like jewels of a crown, they will shine on his land. Next he says, I'm going to save you like a sheep. I'm going to save you like a sheep. But then you're going to be a shiny, bright jewel, a bright, precious stone that is beautiful, a diamond, a ruby, a sapphire. Any other jewels? I don't remember them all. But you're going to be a pretty diamond, something that everybody's going to look at and say, wow, look at that. What's going on with that? It reminds me of Jesus whenever he's talking to his disciples and giving this sermon, and he says, you shall be like the city on a hill. Everybody's going to see you. Everybody's going to look to you for light. Everybody's going to know who you are and what you are. And he says, you're a shining city on a hill. Now, does anybody know anything about ancient Egypt? I do. So here we go. Ancient Egypt, 2,500 is about the year BC. So almost 5,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago. These guys, this guy named Khufu, who's a big pharaoh, he comes along and he builds a pyramid. You guys know what this pyramid's called? The Great Pyramid of Giza. It's the tallest building ever built until, I think, the Eiffel Tower. I might be wrong on that, but I think the Eiffel Tower is the only building to be taller than it. But now we've gone much taller than it. But this building is the only remaining ancient wonder of the world. And the whole reason I bring it up is because it used to be covered, not anymore, the people came by and stole it, but it used to be covered in this fine white limestone. And it's really bright white limestone and then capped with a golden cap at the very top. So that way, when the sun is rising in the east and you shining on these pyramids out in the west, you look at it and it's like a second sun out on the horizon over there. It's blinding bright and it shows and exemplifies the wealth and the prosperity and the ability of the Egyptian people. And it shows them that these people are a bright and shining people that are good. These guys are wealthy. They know what's going on. And that's how God describes us. We are a bright and shining city where the sun shines on us and reflects, and everybody can see it. It's bright and blinding and incredibly good and beautiful. That's how we are whenever God saves us. He saves us and makes us these shining jewels, these bright things that you cannot ignore. So that's what God does, and as a result, thunderstruck people, what do? We worship. People worship God. Whenever God saves them, the proper response is to fall down and worship Him and say, how good are you, God? How great are you? And that's exactly what these people in Zechariah do. Zechariah 9, verse 17. For how great is His goodness, how great is His beauty. Grain shall make the young men flourish, and wine the young women. Now, typically, whenever you see a theophany in the Bible, whenever God appears, two things happen. Faces hit the floor and praises go up. That's what happens back in Isaiah. Here's what happens in Isaiah. Whenever he looks in and sees the throne room, and he says, the train of his robe fills the room. Here's what happens. Isaiah 6:3. And one called to the other, saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. And then in Revelation chapter 4, we looked at the theophany there real quick, where John sees into the throne room, and then he sees these creatures and these elders, and here's what happens. The 24 elders fall down before Him who is seated on the throne. That's Yahweh, God the Creator, and worship Him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. Thunderstruck people, they worship God. That's what they do. It's in their nature, and that is our nature. We must worship God. If you guys want to come up and play. Because back in 700 BC, back whenever Zechariah prophesies to these people, he gives them this theophany. He shows them God in their presence, and He appears over them, and God saves His people, and God protects His people. And as a result, they worship God, and they celebrate the fact that God has done this. Now the thing is, my question I want to ask, why aren't we? Yeah, we get together once a week. We come and we worship. We have a birthday celebration once a month. We like that. But this is an ongoing, every single day, never-ending celebration and never-ending worship where we come together and we say, God, how great you are. Now I'm going to eat some pie in celebration of that. And that's what we need to do each and every day, because thunderstruck people, they celebrate God, and thunderstruck people, they worship God.